Welcome back. Today, let us explore a simple question that history rarely pauses to ask. What if a single, ordinary decision had quietly changed the course of an entire world war? We often imagine history as something driven by grand strategies and powerful leaders, but many turning points were far smaller, almost invisible at the moment they happened. A message sent too late, an order slightly misunderstood, a decision made under pressure, without knowing its consequences. In the early days of global conflict, information moved slowly and uncertainty was constant. Commanders relied on limited reports, imperfect maps, and human judgment made in moments of exhaustion. In that fragile environment, even a minor delay could shift events dramatically. A unit arriving hours late could leave a critical position exposed. A cautious decision to wait, rather than advance, could allow the opposing side to regroup. None of these choices felt historic at the time. They felt practical, reasonable, and often unavoidable. What makes these moments fascinating is not their scale, but their timing. History did not change because someone planned to alter the world. It changed because someone chose the safer option, trusted incomplete information, or hesitated for just long enough. From there, events began to move on their own. One outcome led to another, alliances shifted, and strategies adapted. By the time the consequences became visible, there was no simple way back. Looking at these moments now, it is tempting to imagine alternative paths. Not a completely different war, but one shaped by slightly different outcomes. Borders drawn differently, conflicts ending earlier or lasting longer. Lives redirected in ways no one could have predicted. This is not about rewriting history, but about understanding how delicate it truly was. When we zoom in on these small decisions, we see that the world we live in today was never guaranteed. It emerged from countless moments where history could have quietly gone another way. History often feels permanent, as if major events were inevitable. But what if they were not? What if the direction of entire nations hinged not on wars or revolutions, but on the length of a single human life? Today's story begins with a simple question: what might have changed if a key historical figure had lived just 10 more years? Many influential leaders, thinkers, and innovators shaped the world during remarkably short lifetimes. Some passed away just as their ideas were gaining momentum. Others left behind unfinished visions, plans that never moved beyond paper, or reforms that were only partially realized. At the moment of their passing, the world did not pause. Power shifted, priorities changed, and history continued forward without them. But imagine a slightly different timeline. 10 additional years is not a lifetime, yet it is long enough to stabilize policies, guide successors, or see bold ideas take root. A leader might have prevented instability by mentoring the next generation. A scientist could have refined discoveries that later took decades to fully understand. A thinker might have influenced culture in ways that softened divisions rather than deepening them. What makes this idea compelling is its realism. This is not fantasy or speculation without limits. Illnesses were often unpredictable. Medical care was limited. Accidents were common. Survival often depended on chance. A single recovery, a delayed diagnosis, or a safer journey could have quietly extended a life and, with it, a legacy. When we look back, it becomes clear that history is not only shaped by actions, but by absence. The world we inherited is partly defined by voices that went silent too soon. Exploring these lost years reminds us that history was never fixed. Sometimes, the future depended on how long one person remained part of the story. Let us consider one of history's most fragile moments, the instant when everything depends on a single second. Assassinations are often remembered as decisive turning points, moments that reshaped nations overnight. But behind every successful attempt lies a chain of uncertainty, missed timing, mechanical flaws, unexpected interruptions. What if just one of those factors had gone differently? Imagine a public event proceeding almost exactly as recorded, except for one small change. A warning noticed too late. A movement slightly altered. A moment of hesitation that disrupts the outcome. In that alternate instant, history does not collapse or restart, it simply continues, but on a different path. When a prominent figure survives, the immediate shock still exists, but its meaning changes. Instead of a sudden absence, there is a renewed presence. Policies continue rather than abruptly ending. Power struggles unfold more slowly. Decisions are made with caution instead of urgency. The world adjusts, but without the sharp break that history books later emphasize. What is often overlooked is how much uncertainty follows such moments. Survival does not guarantee stability. A leader might change direction, becoming more guarded or more determined. Public trust might strengthen or quietly erode. Allies and rivals alike would reassess their positions, unsure of what comes next. The future becomes less dramatic, but more unpredictable. This idea challenges how we understand cause and effect. We tend to link major historical shifts to dramatic endings, but sometimes the real turning point is what did not happen. A life continuing, rather than ending, can reshape timelines in subtler but equally powerful ways. By exploring these near misses, we are reminded that history is often decided not by certainty, but by chance. The world we know today may exist simply because one moment unfolded exactly as it did and not a second later. We turn to something far quieter than battles or leaders, a message. Throughout history, information has been fragile. Letters were lost, messengers delayed, signals misunderstood. Entire events sometimes hinged not on decisions, but on whether those decisions were ever communicated at all. So what if a crucial message was never delivered? Before instant communication, timing was everything. A letter could take days or weeks to arrive, crossing uncertain terrain and unpredictable conditions. Along the way, anything could happen. Weather could intervene. Routes could change. A messenger might be forced to turn back, or a message might arrive too late to matter. None of this was unusual. It was simply how the world worked. Now imagine a single message that never reaches its destination. A warning that goes unread. An order that is never received. A clarification that arrives after actions have already been taken. On its own, the loss seems minor. But decisions made without full information often lead to irreversible outcomes. Armies move when they should have waited. Negotiations collapse when they might have succeeded. Trust breaks down because silence is misinterpreted as intent. What makes this scenario especially powerful is how invisible it is. History rarely records the messages that never arrived. We only see the results: confusion, misalignment, and consequences that appear deliberate but were actually accidental. Later generations assume purpose where there was only absence. In a world shaped by incomplete knowledge, missing information could be just as influential as a direct command. Entire chains of events might unfold simply because no one knew they were supposed to stop. By focusing on these lost connections, we see history from a different angle. Not as a series of bold moves, but as a fragile network where meaning depended on delivery. Sometimes, the future changed not because someone spoke but because no one ever heard the message at all. Let us step back and look at history on a much larger scale. Empires are often remembered as powerful, stable forces, rising and falling according to grand timelines. But in reality, many stood on surprisingly fragile foundations. Their survival often depended on timing, leadership, and a narrow balance of control. So what if a major empire had collapsed earlier or never fallen at all? Empires rarely end in a single moment. Decline is usually slow, marked by internal strain, economic pressure, and distant regions becoming harder to govern. Yet sometimes, a single crisis accelerates everything: a poorly handled transition of power, a rebellion that spreads faster than expected, a financial decision made too late. If any one of these moments had unfolded slightly differently, the entire timeline could shift. Imagine an empire falling decades earlier than recorded. Borders would change before cultures fully blended. Languages might disappear rather than spread. Trade routes would redirect, altering which regions gained wealth and influence. Alternatively, imagine that same empire holding on just a little longer. Reforms might stabilize it. Technology could strengthen its control. The world map today might look unfamiliar, not because of conquest, but because collapse was delayed. What is striking is how these outcomes often hinge on narrow windows of opportunity. Empires did not fall because collapse was inevitable, but because recovery came too late. The difference between survival and disappearance was sometimes measured in years, not centuries. By examining these possibilities, we begin to understand that global history was never fixed. The world we know emerged not only from expansion, but from the precise timing of decline. A slightly earlier fall or a slightly longer survival could have quietly rewritten the foundations of the modern world. We move away from politics and power and into the world of ideas. Scientific discoveries often feel inevitable when viewed in hindsight, as if progress naturally moved forward. But in reality, many breakthroughs depended on whether people were willing to listen. So what if a scientific discovery had been ignored or delayed? Throughout history, new ideas have frequently challenged established beliefs. Some were welcomed, but many were dismissed, misunderstood, or considered impractical. A discovery could exist on paper for years before anyone recognized its importance. Sometimes it took a change in leadership, a new generation of thinkers, or a crisis to bring attention to ideas that were already there. Imagine a discovery arriving at the wrong moment. Without support, funding, or public trust, it remains unused. Progress slows, not because knowledge is absent, but because acceptance is delayed. Medicine advances later than it could have. Technology remains limited. Entire fields develop decades behind their potential. What makes this idea powerful is that it highlights how human judgment shapes progress. Knowledge alone does not change the world. People do. A single skeptical decision, a lack of resources, or a refusal to challenge tradition can quietly postpone transformation. The effects are rarely immediate, but they accumulate over time. In an alternate timeline, a delayed discovery might lead to prolonged hardship or missed opportunities. In another, early acceptance could accelerate development beyond what history recorded. Either way, the difference lies not in intelligence, but in timing and trust. By looking at discoveries that were overlooked or slow to gain recognition, we see that progress is fragile. The modern world is built not only on brilliant ideas, but on the moments when someone finally chose to take them seriously. We narrow the focus to a single place and a single day. Wars are often described through long campaigns and sweeping strategies, but history can turn on one battlefield. Sometimes, the outcome of an entire conflict depended on a moment measured in hours. So what if a single battle had ended differently? Battles are shaped by variables that are impossible to fully control. Weather shifts unexpectedly. Terrain favors one side more than anticipated. Communication breaks down at the worst possible moment. Leaders must make decisions quickly, often based on incomplete information. In this uncertainty, even well-prepared plans can unravel. Imagine a battle that history remembers as decisive, but only by a narrow margin. A defensive line holds slightly longer. Reinforcements arrive just in time. A tactical withdrawal succeeds instead of failing. The result is not an immediate victory or defeat for the entire war, but a change in momentum. Morale rises on one side and falters on the other. Political pressure grows. Allies reconsider their commitments. What follows is a chain reaction. Negotiations that never happened suddenly become possible. Conflicts that dragged on might conclude sooner, while others could expand as confidence shifts. The long-term effects are often subtle at first, but they accumulate. Borders are drawn differently. Leadership changes hands under less dramatic circumstances. The narrative of the war evolves, influencing how future generations understand it. What is important here is that the war itself does not need to be rewritten. Only one outcome changes. Yet that single alteration can redirect years of events. History, in this sense, behaves less like a straight line and more like a branching path. By examining battles through this lens, we see how fragile certainty really is. The world we inherited may exist not because of overwhelming superiority, but because one critical moment unfolded just slightly in one direction instead of another. We turn to forces beyond human control. Natural disasters are often described by their size or intensity, but history shows that timing can matter just as much. So what if a natural disaster had struck at a different moment? Earthquakes, floods, storms, and widespread illness have shaped societies for centuries. Yet their historical impact often depended on what was happening at the time. A city at the height of prosperity might recover. The same city, weakened by conflict or economic strain, could collapse. The disaster itself does not change, only the moment in which it arrives. Imagine a major event occurring months earlier or later than recorded. Supply routes might be unprepared. Leadership could be absent or distracted. Relief efforts might move faster or fail entirely. In some cases, a disaster might interrupt a conflict, forcing cooperation. In others, it could intensify instability, accelerating decline. What makes this idea especially revealing is how easily cause and effect can be confused. Societal collapse is often blamed on poor decisions or internal weakness, when in reality, timing played a decisive role. A disaster arriving at the wrong moment could push a fragile system past its limits, while the same event at another time might leave little trace in history. These moments also shape memory. When a disaster coincides with political change, it becomes symbolic, remembered as a turning point. When it does not, it fades into the background. The difference lies not in the event itself, but in the surrounding circumstances. By shifting our focus to timing, we see how history was shaped not only by human action, but by coincidence. The world today reflects not just what happened, but when it happened. Let us imagine progress arriving ahead of schedule. Technology often feels like a steady, unstoppable force, but its arrival is rarely smooth or evenly paced. Many inventions emerged at moments when society was only just ready to use them. So what if a key technology had arrived one generation earlier? A single generation can mean the difference between resistance and acceptance. Earlier societies often lacked the infrastructure, education, or social conditions needed to fully adopt new tools. Yet if technology appears slightly sooner, it does not just change daily life, it reshapes power. Communication becomes faster. Information spreads wider. Control becomes harder to maintain. Imagine earlier access to mass communication. Ideas travel beyond borders long before authorities can react. Education expands unevenly, empowering some groups while unsettling established hierarchies. Economic advantages shift toward those who adapt quickly, leaving others behind. None of this requires dramatic conflict, only time. What is fascinating is how early technology could influence decision-making. Leaders plan differently when information moves faster. Movements organize more effectively. Public awareness grows before institutions know how to respond. The same invention that once supported order might instead accelerate change. At the same time, early arrival brings risk. Without regulations or understanding, technology could deepen inequality or create instability. Society might struggle to adjust, not because the invention is harmful, but because the world around it is not ready. By considering technology's timing, we see that innovation alone does not shape history. Context does. The modern world exists not just because inventions were created, but because they appeared at moments when society could absorb them, sometimes just barely. A single generation earlier, and history might have unfolded very differently. We focus on the moments history barely notices. Textbooks are filled with major dates, famous names, and decisive events, but hidden between them are small details often treated as footnotes. A brief meeting. A minor policy adjustment, an overlooked compromise. What if these quiet moments were actually the true turning points? History is usually told through outcomes, not processes. We remember what succeeded or failed, but rarely the subtle choices that shaped those results. In many cases, the most influential decisions were not dramatic or controversial. They were practical responses to immediate problems, made without any sense that they would matter long term. Imagine a minor agreement that prevented a conflict from escalating. A routine administrative decision that redirected resources. A single conversation that altered how two groups understood each other. At the time, These moments seemed unremarkable. There were no headlines, no celebrations, no warnings. And yet, they quietly set events on a stable path rather than a volatile one. What makes these footnotes powerful is how easily they disappear. When history moves forward without disruption, we assume stability was natural. We rarely ask what prevented chaos. The absence of crisis often hides the importance of restraint, compromise, or timing. As a result, the moments that kept history balanced are the least remembered. If one of these small stabilizing factors had been removed, outcomes might look very different. Tensions could have grown unchecked. Decisions might have hardened instead of softened. Over time, those small changes could have reshaped borders, institutions, and lives. This perspective invites us to read history more carefully. Not just for what happened, but for what almost happened and did not. Sometimes, the future was decided not by dramatic action, but by a quiet choice that kept everything from tipping over. As we reach the end of today's journey, one thing becomes clear: history is far more delicate than it appears in textbooks. The world we know was not shaped only by grand plans or unstoppable forces, but by small moments, narrow margins, and ordinary human decisions made under uncertainty. A delayed message, a life cut short, a battle decided by chance, or a discovery accepted just a little too late, all of these quietly guided the path forward. Looking back, it is easy to believe everything happened exactly as it had to. But when we slow down and examine these turning points, we see how many other futures were possible. History was never fixed. It moved forward because of timing, coincidence, and choices made without knowing their consequences. The present we live in is only one version among many that could have existed. Perhaps the most humbling thought is this: the moments that shaped the world were often invisible when they happened. They did not feel important. They did not announce themselves. Yet they mattered more than anyone realized. Thank you for spending this time with us, and for thinking a little deeper about the fragile threads that connect the past to the present. If you enjoyed this exploration, stay curious, keep questioning what seems inevitable, and join us again for the next story where history might have quietly gone another way.